Hey everyone, welcome to the Superhero Show with Daniel and Chris. Now, this week we're going to talk about a comment made by a little indie filmmaker, Steven Spielberg, about the superhero genre.
Yeah, he's been causing some trouble, the beard has.
Yeah.
Or has he? Let's figure that out.
Yeah.
The quote is, he spoke to Associated Press about his new film, Bridge of Spies, and they started talking about Hollywood as a whole. Now, a couple of years ago, Spielberg said he thought that Hollywood was going to implode because of the reliance on these big budget movies that had to make $1 billion, which is, that's kind of how it's going. Like, they've got to make more than $1 billion now to be successful, some of these bigger movies. So they asked him what his thoughts were, and he said, "We were around when the Western died, and there will be a time when the superhero movie goes the way of the Western. It doesn't mean there won't be another occasion where the Western comes back and the superhero movie someday returns. Of course, right now the superhero movie is alive and thriving. I'm only saying that these cycles have a finite time in popular culture. There will come a day when the mythological stories are supplanted by some other genre that possibly some young filmmaker is just thinking about discovering for all of us." So, initial thoughts on that, Dan?
I think there's some people who've perceived it as a more controversial comment than it is. I think he's a man who's been around a long time. He knows the history of Western cinema pretty well, and he knows that this is an inevitable thing. It's an inevitable thing about. I'm going to trot out my English literature degree, but it's a thing about genres in general. It's decline and fall of genres. It's almost like a kind of an evolutionary or an ecological principle that some things become popular, and because they're popular, they thrive in the marketplace. More of those are made.
Yeah.
And then once they cease to popular, they die back and something else ascends to the kind of throne. And I don't think it's that controversial. That said, I think it conflates the Western and the superhero genre in a way that ignores what's different about the superhero genre, which means it might stay around longer or be different than the Western. The Western wasn't just chucked out of Hollywood because it stopped making money. It stopped making money for a variety of social, historical and cultural reasons, which might not apply to the superhero genre, which is a little bit different.
Yeah. I mean, since we started doing this show, we've talked about this bubble potentially bursting, and yet since we started doing this show, all that's happened is it's ramped up.
Yeah.
And I guess more and more produced.
Yeah. I guess it's historical frame for this. Like, we're still in the kind of year-based rather than the decade-based.
We're in the sweet spot though, right now, aren't we? But I don't know if it's more about that it won't die, but it will split off into subgenres. Like, the horror film didn't really exist as a genre until the 70s, I'd say. There were horror films, but it became a much bigger machine in the 70s, and now it's just split off into all these different little identities. And I feel like the superhero movie is kind of doing that a little bit, in that we've had a lot of bombastic, big, sort of over-the-top superhero movies, and we've got a lot more coming up. But then we got Guardians that took it down the sci-fi route. Doctor Strange is taking it down the mystical route and the supernatural route. Lego are taking it down the Lego route, which is totally different to anything that's gone before. And I wonder if these subgenres will kind of proliferate, and maybe the big Avengers Age of Ultron style movie that I think we all felt this summer we'd maybe had enough. We'd seen that story enough times, that finale enough times, that might die away, only to come back. Because as he says, like, it'll come and go, it'll ebb and flow.
Yeah, well, on the other hand, like, I remember saw something on Twitter a few weeks back where someone was saying, God, all of these superhero films. And if you actually look in the grand scheme of things, how many superhero films there are compared to other types of films being made at a blockbuster level, it's not that many. And I know there's going to be a lot more next year, and there's a lot in production. And they're the kind of films that dominate at least the Twitter conversations we're a part of, and I think that skews reality. Because when you actually look at the biggest films of this year so far, Fast and Furious and Jurassic World, does that mean, if you're a Hollywood exec, you go, do we want to like greenlit some kind of old school adventure movie?
Yeah, it's funny, they dominate in the multiplexes, but I think you're right there, because if you look at when the Western was at its height, how many westerns were being produced. There were hundreds every year. We're talking about 3 this year, 5 or 6 next year. It's just, unfortunately, you know, they're kind of dominating screens because they're just taking up so much room over the summer.
And when we began this conversation, I said, obviously, I think his general point does hold with genre. Just like any kind of fad, whatever it is, you get to a point of saturation and it naturally dies down. You see this across lots of different fields. But the thing that's kind of specific about the superhero genre right now is, one, the different films are interconnected in a way that the Western genre never was. Like, obviously some films with sequels aside, but there's kind of a universe where you see one film and there's other bits that fill it all in. That's actually quite a unique model in Hollywood going forward, really, and a lot of people are trying to emulate it. And then on top of that is just the vast kind of merchandising, like, cultural machine behind it, you know, powered now by Disney and Warner Brothers. The fact that there's going to be kids growing up watching cartoons of these things, and then when they get a bit older they can buy toys of these things, and when they go a bit older they might want to see the film of said character. It's like all consuming in a way that the Western never was. So I think those things will possibly extend the longevity of the superhero genre. But I agree with your point, the idea of it like breaking down into subgenres.
Yeah, and I think the one that could really take off, we talked about Supernatural last week, but I really think the sci-fi superhero movie will, and not the Fantastic Four reboot style, but more the Guardian style. Like, I look at the comics that Mark Millar is doing that are kind of, they're trying to get movies off the ground, like Starlight and Jupiter's Legacy. And I look at the future with Star Wars. I think sci-fi is going to come in a lot more with a Star Wars movie coming out every year. I think other studios will look at that, depending on their success, but at the moment they look like a sure thing.
But this is the exact thing we're talking about here, is this notion of cycles, because Star Wars comes out in a period of time where sci-fi wasn't particularly popular. Fox has tremendous sex, and then things like Alien get greenlit on the back of Star Wars. Like, who has a sci-fi script? Oh, great, let's greenlight that. Let's give it to a new director. And something amazing comes out of that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And, you know, I think that's a good idea of a cycle. The fact that Star Wars is even coming back, and I know we've had the prequels, but this feels like a kind of ushering in a slightly different time for it.
Yeah, and also, you know, we're talking about, you know, all these superheroes are based off of comics, but really, when you think about Star Wars is a superhero movie. I mean, Luke Skywalker has superpowers. They're brought about by the Force. They are, you know, obviously it's based in older myths.
That's the thing. Like, it's like all these things are underpinned by mythic archetypes.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about also, like, the genre will evolve in weird and wonderful ways. For instance, a subgenre of horror that got incredibly trite throughout the 80s increasingly was the slasher genre. Heavily iterated upon to the point where you knew every single genre beat. You knew all the conventions, all the tropes. But what that leads to is, and this is like a theory about genre, is the end stage of any genre is parody. The time that a genre looks back, because the audience is so familiar with those tropes, you can make fun of them. And then what comes along? Scream comes along. Wes Craven's New Nightmare comes along, where you can actually look back at the genre and play with the audience.
And
it's really cool.
I wished it had been a better movie. I know people love it, but Mystery Men maybe came too soon. Kick-Ass was the one for me that managed to kind of satirise the genre while at the same time actually being a really good superhero movie. And then I'm sure the ones that will nail it are these Lego Batman movies that they've got planned. I'm sure they will undercut every superhero movie that's come before and have a joke at their expense.
I think that would be brilliant. Imagine in 20 years' time we've had Marvel's Phase 3 and 4, and you could have a legitimate Howard the Duck movie that makes fun of the Marvel universe that's been around for 20 odd years. That sounds brilliant to me.
So, I want that now.
So I just want that idea.
So we'll see. It's all just speculation at this point, but I think it's interesting because if Spielberg's right and this stuff all buggers off in a year or two, we're out of a job. That's not ideal.
Star Wars.
The Star Wars. Oh, you've got your Rebel Base. I'll have to start. What can I do? The torture porn show. That one died out.
You already started that one. You got loads of episodes of that.
Yeah, on my phone. Yeah. Final thoughts.
I hope it doesn't go. I don't think it's going anywhere for at least. I'm going to make a massive claim here. At least 10 years.
Yeah, and we will revisit that on the Superhero Show in 2025
years.
Yeah, at the end of that summer.
2025. Good. So that's something to look forward to.
Job done.
Feedback?
Feedback. Do you want me to go first, or are you going first?
I can go. So last week we talked about how Marvel is going to embrace supernatural elements and kind of comic book movies in general. He says you talked about supernatural elements in your last show and how Doctor Strange will be the stepping stone for introducing this aspect to the MCU. But I think you overlooked something. And he's right, we did. Marvel's Iron Fist. Although Daredevil Season 2 and Luke Cage are expected to be released before Iron Fist, it would be the perfect time around Doctor Strange in November 2016, early 2017, to release Iron Fist, which has heavy elements of the supernatural. And I guess that's the thing, because we watched Daredevil, and there's hints at Iron Fist's origin in there, and lots of supernatural stuff, even though that's a very grounded, gritty show.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm looking forward to that one. I want to say hello to the superhero show viewers that said hello to me at Fright Fest this weekend.
Oh, that's nice.
Richard Orty, hello. And Ben Robinson, who couldn't make it but messaged me. He has it. He lives abroad and he has it with his cornflakes every Sunday morning.
Oh, that's nice.
That's nice. Hi, Ben. Right. This is from Mike Hasler in New Zealand. He says, I can't believe you never mentioned Cara Delevingne playing the Enchantress in Suicide Squad. They don't get much more supernatural than her. In fact, I think she could even be the big bad in the film. Thoughts? That's funny. The first time I read that earlier, I thought he meant that the actress can't get more supernatural. But he's talking about the character.
And he's right, we did miss that out. That's a very good point.
Yes. I've never seen anything with that woman in, so I really don't know what to expect.
You saw her in some preview footage of Pan playing a mermaid.
I did.
That was alright.
I didn't really get it. She was in that Michael Winterbottom film that I haven't watched. I don't know if she's a thing or not. I guess she is, because she's in everything.
You've seen that
right
footage of her being grumpy on a talk.
To
be fair, they were pretty rude to her.
Yeah, I
actually
agree.
Quite on her side.
Agree, but it was making me cringe so much.
I've seen her on lots of buses in London.
Yeah.
Lovely eyebrows.
Massive.
Dave Smith from Sydney, Australia, has written in about the rumoured Blade reboot.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I think the Blade character in the story should be played by Wesley Snipes, and he should take on the Whistler role in the movie. What do you think? I think that is a really good way of incorporating him, just this kind of mentor.
Yep, sounds good. On that same subject, Professor Henry Higgins has written in and says, for who should direct the new Blade movie, I'd love to see James Wan let loose on the project. He has a great mind for horror, especially aesthetically, and I believe he could do wonders with Blade. Outside of that, I wouldn't mind Stephen Norrington getting another bite of the cherry, but this time with Marvel Studios fully behind the project. He hasn't directed since 2003's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but his two movies either side of Blade, Death Machine and The Last Minute, were really good. God, I can't remember Death Machine or The Last Minute.
I can't.
But we'll trust you on that, Henry. Yeah, I mean, what's he been doing for 12 years then? TV?
Well, that's a really bad experience, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah.
James Wan, I thought, that's a great choice. And then I remembered he's directing Aquaman.
And if you paid attention to this show as well, you'll know that I had a drink with him years ago in New York at a party, and he told me his dream was to direct a movie of The Shadow, like a reboot of The Shadow.
That'd be good.
So he might do...
Can we get Alec Baldwin back with a funny nose?
Yeah. Right.
That's one of my favourite special effects in all of cinema.
Unrecognisable. That's what The Shadow looks like.
Yeah. Well, he's unrecognisable from now. It looks very different now.
He does, but we're not... I think... Let's move on.
Okay. Mike from Ottawa says, I have a feeling Black Widow will secretly be on Captain America's side in Civil War. After the events of Winter Soldier, I feel her and Cap are too close. While having her side with Iron Man over Captain America would create an interesting dynamic, having her not reveal her true motives until the end will still allow said dynamic to happen.
Right, can we please stop speculating, stop talking about who's on what side?
I put this in
especially everyone who writes for IGN who's not me, because it's annoying me. I don't want to know who's on what side. I know I have to at this point.
I put this in because they released imagery of who's on whose side. But at the same time, just because those are the starting teams doesn't mean... I'm sure a lot of the film will consist of people flip-flopping and actually realising, identifying with other people's points of view at the end of the story.
Like in the comic. And finally, Adam Brunt says, I'm around Dan's age, old, and also love Spider-Man as it was my first film experience and has influenced my love for superhero films ever since. Anyway, do you not think it is a mistake for Marvel to skip the origin of Spider-Man because every movie is someone's first and it has to make sense? Now, has it been confirmed that they're not going to do any kind of origin?
I don't know if it has been
I'm not sure it has.
confirmed.
Maybe heavily rumoured?
I think so, yeah. But at the same time, like, I think there's a difference between doing the origin and having a 20-second flashback or something like that, or a clever piece of dialogue or a news report of this kid or something.
Or can I counter and say, why do we need the origin in Civil War? Why can't he just show up? But then he's getting his own movies now. Shouldn't he have his origin in his own movie via flashback? So we get the Spider-Man origin, but in the standalone film rather than Captain
done
America.
with other characters, you know. They're going to do that with Black Panther, presumably. We're not going to.
Yeah,
I'm sure we're not going to get all of his backstory.
So I think maybe we'll get the origin, but just not necessarily in Captain America, but in his own movie, as he deserves.
Or in his own movie, it could be a really cool opening title sequence, and then that's it. And also, like, it's very easy to find the origin of Spider-Man. Like, anyway. I just think
he's had enough.
I just don't want another Uncle Ben. I don't want to see that man die again. Don't need to see an old man die again on the street.
No,
I've seen it too many times in life and in movies.
All right, I think we should stop now.
Anyway, you can email us at superhero@ign.com, and until next week, thank you for watching and see you then.